Welcome to the Fantasy Hackers Podcast, where we have broken the code for daily fantasy sports and let you in on the secrets.
Welcome back to Fantasy Hackers. I've never really listened to that intro much, but it says where we've broken the code for daily fantasy, and I think that might be true. I currently entered $2 into daily fantasy, and I'm winning $52 from $2. I'm in first place out of 475 people.
Not only are those incredible margins, but most of our fan base is not going to understand the commitment level of $2 from Scott. That's a huge, his belief in the fantasy hacker system was huge for him to put $2 in. And I know we're laughing and joking, but I'm being 100% serious. Scott doesn't throw away $2.
No.
This is the cheapest man I've ever met. I'll just say that.
Cheaper than me?
No, not cheaper than you.
You committed $0, Josie, so.
But in my defense, that's strictly because I don't know how to use the app.
Well, that's what we're going to do today.
I still don't understand what I'm doing here.
We're on the podcast.
Well, that's kind of what today's episode I think is going to be about, is we can teach Sam how to play daily fantasy sports.
I'd like that.
Well, let's get right into it now. For those of you who are new to the podcast, usually we go through the big slate coming up, but with the NBA Cup, which doesn't really excite me that much, but with the NBA Cup, the games are kind of off schedule, so we're going to take a little bit different approach tonight. And first off, I want to hear how the doctor visit went, Josie. You don't have to share any HIPAA violation stuff, but we all want to know the details on how the doctor went.
Which doctor is this?
I don't know. Last Tuesday, maybe during the day.
Appointment went well. Got a mole removed. Not a. It was more of a cosmetic. More of just I kept. Once I saw it, I couldn't not see it. It was very small, but I wanted it gone. So
where was it at?
The back of my head, which is odd that it was bugging me because I couldn't see it by looking down. I could only see it by looking in the mirror, in the reflection of another mirror. But it's gone and all is well. I did pick the scab off and it got infected, like the size of a quarter, which is unfortunate. But all is well now. All is well now, I believe. I think.
You're describing exactly how I'm feeling about the shining on my forehead right now. It's there. I only see it in this mirror. It's annoying. But unfortunately, there's nothing I can do about it.
Yeah.
What I'm most curious about is the height of. You mock my doors, but I'd like to draw attention to that tree you've got behind you. How tall is that tree?
That's a 6-foot tree, Elder. That's my first tree me and my wife ever had. If I turn you slightly here, you can see the edge of my tree here. This is actually a 15-foot tall tree in my living room.
So I appreciate the 15-footer. 6 foot, not so much.
Yeah. So these ornaments are where we travel. We get an ornament everywhere we travel, and this is the tree they go on.
Okay.
This is an 8-foot tall door here, white oak glass.
Yeah, I've put glass in those type of doors before.
I think that's for our other podcast, though, Josie.
A large percentage of this daily fantasy sports podcast has been about doors.
Yeah. Yeah. If you are looking for quotes on doors, you can hit me at Gmail. My contact is in the notes of the show.
All right.
Well, let's get into it. So, Brandon, you're kind of the fantasy expert here. I know all four of us are equal co-founders, but you seem to have a little bit more of a leg up on the competition.
I've lost more money than all of us for sure with this, so
yeah,
I definitely know what not to do. But I did come up with 5 tips and tricks for fantasy NBA players if you're just getting started. Hopefully, we can help Sam kind of hedge some of the learning curve that comes with the
nice.
So, just as an overview for Sam, the way daily fantasy sports works is each day you go into the app, you get a salary cap, Each player is assigned a salary level. You fill out your roster, staying under the cap, and then you can be matched up in a variety of different games. You can it's up to you. You can enter any dollar amount that you want in a head-to-head, and it'll randomly put you against somebody. You can go in a 50-50 or a double up, which is one of the ones Scott's doing. He's making 80 cents on that, which is they'll take like a pool of however big. Sometimes it's 100, sometimes it's thousands. And if you're in the top half, then you double your money. If you're in the bottom half, you lose your money.
Quick question. So is everyone in Scott's pool? Because Scott bet $1, right?
Yep.
Does that mean everybody only bet $1 in that pool?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
I mean, like if Scott was betting against people willing to fork up $1,000, he's probably going to have a lot stiffer competition, I'd assume.
Yep. And yeah, we'll talk about that too. Like the contest that you enter is really just as important as your roster. Making sure you understand what contest you're entering. Because the other one, and Scott seems like he lucked out because he's entered a cash game, which when you hear cash games are the head-to-heads or the double-ups, meaning all you got to do is be better than half of the people in it. So you don't have to have the best lineup in the world. You just have to be in the top 50% or better than the person that you're playing against. Your prizes aren't going to – you're only going to double your money. But the other option is a tournament game, which is usually only pays out, the top 5 or 10%, but you can make a huge profit. So that's the other one Scott's in. He did a $1 tournament, and it sounds like he's making $50 right now, being in the lead.
You did say something though that caught me off guard. You said I'm lucky, which I think that's a gross overstatement. I don't.
Which I've seen your life, and I'd agree. I've never seen anything you've ever done that's been close to lucky.
But carry on.
So what I'm saying by that is typically you don't want to enter the same type of lineup in cash as you do in tournaments. So in tournaments, you want to be a little bit more risky, knowing that you've got to be in the top 5%. With cash games, you want to play guys that are more like they're going to hit their floor. They have a really high floor. They're never going to have a dud game where they're not scoring at all. Whereas the tournament, you can kind of play guys that you don't really know what they're going to do, but they could pop off. And they kind of that's where more streaky type of players go, guys with a lot of variability if you want to play them in the tournament games. So we'll talk about that a little bit more, but that's kind of the basics of how you play daily fantasy sports. The NBA is a different animal or different beast. With the other sports, especially football, the more people play daily fantasy football, because you can kind of set your lineup on a Wednesday and be good to go through Sunday and kind of let the cards fall how they may. Most injury news is known in the NFL by Wednesday or Thursday. If they're going to play on Sunday, sometimes there's some game time decisions that you got to monitor. But with the NBA, I mean, a guy could play the night before, play 36 minutes, finish the game, and then at 5:30 the next day, they decide he's out with back spasms or for personal reasons or something, and it messes up your whole lineup. So it's a little bit more intense in the fact that you really got to monitor that. And that's kind of the first tip of the 5 is you got to play daily fantasy NBA and take it serious. You got to be monitoring this stuff all the way up until lock. And when you hear the word lock, what they're talking about is the time when the lineups are locked. So depending on the contest that you play in, most lineups are going to lock either at 5 or 5:30, depending on when the first games start on the East Coast. You can play some late tournaments where they're just taking West Coast games. But most of the big tournaments and the big games that you can enter are going to be a 5 or a 5:30 lock, depending on when those games start. So all the way up until lock, you got to be monitoring it for breaking news. So if the first game tips at 5, you can't make any changes to your roster after 5. So if at 4:45 you find out LeBron's not playing and you want to shift your money to Anthony Davis and you have LeBron in your lineup, you got to hurry and go adjust accordingly. And maybe at that point now that's kind of changed how the whole night's going to go, and you might have to change your whole roster. So it's not a thing where you can just get on before work and set your lineup. and think that you're going to be successful night in and night out. It's a thing where you got to kind of monitor it throughout the day, look at it early, kind of get an overview of the slate, and then kind of have some provisional plans in place if somebody does get hurt or there's a late scratch or injuries open up. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I got a question for you. Do you think that AI is going to become a factor in helping people build lineups, or
I hope so. I hope that's where we get with
Fantasy Hacker?
Yeah, with Fantasy Hacker. The problem I see with kind of a lot of the optimizers out there, a lot of like you can have all the data in the world, but every player is going to have a different tendency, and I think that's where AI can come in. Like, and we'll talk about this later, even if we want to play Jace's clip. But some players have a really high variability based on home and road splits. Some have a very high variability if they're playing on a back-to-back, or if they have 3 days rest. Some of them play better in different cities.
Elevation.
Elevation. So there's a lot of different factors, and some of them affect some players, and some of them don't affect some players. And so, I think AI can step in and figure out which players are affected by which variables. Any other thoughts on kind of lock time and tracking it throughout the day?
No.
All right. The second tip I have is to pay attention to bad defenses and high pace teams. So for obvious reasons, bad defenses are going to give up more points. More points means more fantasy points. High pace means more possessions. More possessions means more fantasy points. So if you're playing a really good defense who grinds it out on offense and takes 20 seconds off the clock every time they get the ball, there's just not going to be enough fantasy points to go around to win a tournament. So especially when you're playing in tournaments, you want to avoid that stuff because it's just not going to be. So I pulled up top defenses in the NBA right now. So OKC is the number one defense in the league. They're giving up 103 points per 48 minutes, which is crazy to think that that's the number one defense in the NBA, where 10 years ago that number was down in the 80s. But Houston Rockets are second, giving up 105 points a game. Orlando Magic is third. Minnesota, with Rudy in the middle, is fourth. And the Clippers are fifth, with Zubac holding down the middle. And the Grizzlies are really close behind, tied with the Warriors. So those are the top seven. Boston Celtics at 8, Cleveland at 9, Miami at 10. So it's not like you should always completely run from those teams, but if you have like a toss-up and you're looking at a player playing against OKC versus a player that's playing against the Washington Wizards, I mean, probably look at the Wizards. The other thing is to target the bad defenses. So keep these in mind. The Utah Jazz are the worst defense in the NBA, and it's not particularly close even. So it's like if you take the 22nd worst team is Indiana, they're at 115. Toronto's at 115. The Lakers are at 115. Now we're to the 25th worst team in the league. That's Chicago. They're at 116. Portland's at 116. Brooklyn's at 117. New Orleans is at 117. Washington's at 117. But the Jazz are getting up 120 points. We skip 3 extra. They give 3 more points than the next worst team in the NBA every game. So their defense is horrible. If you're looking for just like an edge, that's what fantasy basketball is about, finding an edge somewhere. And if there's a guy playing against the Jazz, I mean, and you're looking at another player at the similar value, take the guy playing against the Jazz because he's going to have more opportunity. There's going to be more points in that game. The other thing I mentioned was pace. So same factor. If you can find a team that plays fast and that is terrible on defense, that's the gold mine. So the Jazz are 13th in pace. They were higher. They're falling a little bit because Keontae George refuses to cross the midline before 7.5 seconds every play. So, but when Keontae's out, I mean, the Jazz play so fast when he's out. Colin Sexton is a fast break layup every time he gets the ball. The backup point guard, who's that kid from USC? Is their backup? Isaiah
Collier.
Collier, yeah. He's a fast break every time he touches the ball. When Keontae's in, he's crawling the ball up the court. But everyone else is just lightning fast and terrible on defense. The funny thing is with the pace, the fastest teams in the NBA right now, number 1 is the Chicago Bulls and number 2 is the Memphis Grizzlies. 5 years ago, those teams were the slowest in the NBA. I mean, Memphis was the grindhouse. Chicago had who's that New York coach?
Tom Thibodeau.
Yeah, Thibodeau. And Thibodeau, I mean, they were grinding people out. So it's funny to see those teams are on the top. Atlanta's 3rd with Quinn and Trae Young pushing the pace. The Wizards are 4th. So the Wizards are the 4th fastest team and the second to last worst defense. So, I mean, that's just saying target the Wizards. Play people that are playing against the Wizards.
I just gotta jump in and say I don't think I've ever heard you not know 2 NBA personnel's names like you just struggled to do. Are you okay?
Well, after last or 2 weeks ago when Scott was just rattling off colleges left and right, I think my brain just shifted to let's just ask Scott whatever name I need to.
Tom Thibodeau's a well-known household name in the NBA, and then I mean, most people are not going to know who Collier is, but I mean, you have courtside seats next to the bench. You'd think you'd know
his first name because we're on a first name basis.
Oh, Isaiah. Okay. All right. I'm nervous. I care about you, and that scared me.
No, he's fine.
Red Bull.
The other comment I'd like to make, and maybe this isn't the right time, but just based on what I've heard so far, it's really helped me to understand our target market. Because, I mean, you got to be on this thing. You got to be watching our podcast. Then you got to be getting on DraftKings and signing up. Then you got to be watching your lineup constantly. Like, we're basically, our target market is trust fund babies and homeless people with family. So that's what I've gathered out of this podcast is, that's who I'm going after. I'm not going after me. I'm going after people that have no life.
Well, I mean, that's also hopefully what Fantasy Hackers does. I mean, it hopefully takes some of the guesswork out of it so you don't have to put in hours and hours every day, right? So we'll compile the data for you. We'll create an optimizer. But the optimizer updates throughout the day. So if there's a late scratch where guys all of a sudden going to play 0 minutes, Fantasy Hacker updates. So I guess the takeaway there is don't run your Fantasy Hacker optimizer. Don't look at the stats in the morning. Go pull them up at 4:30 to get the most accurate data and find the best value.
Let me just tell you this real quick, and I don't consider myself a sales guy. I'll leave that to Nils and But I'm looking at my team. I'm first place out of 475 people.
You're an expert, if you will.
I'm an expert. But really, though, if you look at so I'm looking at my team. There's 6 players. It shows the percent of people that drafted a player. And so I drafted Giannis. 69% of people drafted him. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, 72% of people drafted him. And those are like kind of no-brainers in my opinion. But then Brook Lopez, 26.9%. Cason Wallace, 26.7%. Gary Trent Jr., 16.6%. And AJ Green, 22.5%. So my team was made up of guys that were, the majority of people did not draft them. And it was all just based on looking at the Fantasy Hackers, their projected value. I just went straight off of that.
Yeah, and that's the roster percentages is an interesting thing to look at, and that's kind of leads us into the third tip, which we've talked about a little bit already, but understanding your cash versus tournament lineups. So exactly what Scott was saying, if you're going to win a tournament, you can't take what they call chalk. Like if you're filling out like a March Madness bracket, that's when you'll hear chalk get thrown around a lot. Chalk means you're taking the higher seed every time. Chalk in daily fantasy basketball means you're taking the highest percentage owned roster players across the board. So if there's 8 guys that are just obviously more valuable or priced wrong compared to the field, and everybody's taking those guys, you have to figure out a way to get different if you're going to win a tournament. And so, like Scott, who'd you say you had that was 16%?
Gary Trent Jr.
Yes, Gary Trent Jr. at 16%. I mean, 2 out of every 20 people took Gary Trent Jr. That's a way that Scott got different, and that's the way he's edged out. A lot of the competition is by taking him.
AJ Green 22%.
With that said, you on the big numbers guys, you probably want them, right? Like if everyone's taking Giannis and Shai, they're going to score so many points. You don't want to say, hey, I'm going to go be different than that guy to be different. I mean, you probably want to maintain the high scores, right? And you're trying to find the difference in the fringe. Is that wrong, or is that?
No, not all. I mean, I think the guys that win tournament they usually have 4 or 5 guys that are obvious chalk, and then they're getting different, like you said, on the fringe. And maybe you got different with, you took a different, star that most people weren't taking that night, that looks like he was overpriced, but then he popped off and won it. So, I mean, when you're playing a cash game, really lean on those value numbers on Fantasy Hacker. When you're trying to play a tournament game, I would almost ignore the value numbers until you get to those, until you're trying to fill out the rest of your roster. So look at who you think is going to pop off for as like a star, because those guys have more variability, right? So like when we're looking at like players at the bottom to fill out the bottom of your roster with lower salaries, those guys have little variable, right? So they're $3,500. We're hoping they get to 15 fantasy points, but most of those guys have no chance of getting to 40 fantasy points and tripling their value or going over their value by if they get to 40 fantasy points and they're projected at 15, that's an extra 25 points, and there's just no chance, right? But like Luka last night had 96 fantasy points, which is outrageous. He was like 11,000, which is we need him to get 55 fantasy points, and he went and got 40 points more than what his value would have been. So like there's only so many guys in the league that have that kind of pop off potential, and if you didn't have Luka last night in your tournament, you weren't winning, right, with that kind of value. So really look at value when you're filling out the bottom of your roster, and then you got to figure out who's gonna pop off. It's going to be a stud, and make sure that you have him, because there's nobody that can, at the bottom of your roster that can do what some of those all-stars can do.
And that's kind of what we're going to provide, right? Like we're going to try to provide insight into who that might be on our podcast, I assume. I mean, obviously we're guessing, but it's an educated guess. If it's you, Adams, giving us the guess, if it's Josie giving us the guess, it's an uneducated guess. So I think it's important for our listeners to understand which one of us they're listening to.
Yeah, that's clear.
Coming from the guy who literally went to the wrong establishment today to sign tax papers.
Not tax papers, an account. It was a financial account. It wasn't a tax paper.
Even worse. You literally went to it's like going to Target and thinking you're at Walmart.
Yeah. If we're talking about tax papers, I did go to pay my taxes on the Friday after Thanksgiving, and it was closed, and I had to wait till Monday morning, but on the deadline. That's a different story.
Yeah, Elder, we just need to get your mind right. You're too worried about my doors, and when you should be worried about what papers you're signing, what taxes you're paying the day after Thanksgiving. They can wait till January. Just give it a minute.
They actually can't. The deadline is usually the end of November for business taxes and property taxes, but
not mine.
Well, actually, yes, they are.
I don't.
You pay it in escrow in your account, and they pay them before the end of November.
Escrow's not the problem, Elder.
That's a different podcast, but just everybody knows Milwaukee won by 20, just barely to OKC. Anyone that was watching or following.
And I ended up winning. First out of 475.
I also get we're 25 minutes into this, and I know this is Fantasy Hacker podcast, but I also am curious on Josie's take on Bill Belichick going down into the college football realm.
I'll make a bold claim right now. They'll be a playoff team next year. 1 year playoff team.
You want to put money on that?
I got it invested in the hacker, so we'll revisit it in a year.
Take a soft money loan out and bet that.
Oh man.
All right. Fourth tip is, this is a good tip right here. This is only coming from this podcast. Create your own contest on DraftKings. So on DraftKings, you can go and you can select head-to-head. And then on the app, once you select head-to-head, if that's what you want to do, you want to make a cash lineup, go select head-to-head, and then it's going to pop up a screen that'll say like $1, $2, $5, and it'll like go down to like what contest do you want to enter. You're going to scroll all the way to the bottom, and it'll say create your own contest. You can create your own contest, and then it'll ask you how much you want to enter that contest, and then it'll ask you how many people you want to, or how many lineups you want to enter. So you can then select $1, $2, $3, $4, $5 contest. You select the dollar amount in your contest, and then you say how many lineups you're going to create. That'll create games on DraftKings for other people to enter. So when you create the game, other people are entering. That's usually where you're going to find some of the easier games, because people don't know what they're doing and they're just entering any random head-to-head game. The next tip is you scroll all the way to the bottom when you go to the number of contests that you want to enter, and there's a little link that's like not bold, and it's like not a button. It's just like a word that says opponent limit. You click opponent limit, and then you can go and select what the limit of number of unique opponents that are allowed to play against you. So then select 1. So what that'll do is some of these like really good fantasy basketball players will come in and they'll do a bunch of $1 lineups because they want to pick on these people that are like not playing, like don't know what they're doing and just dabbling in it, and they'll make 100 $1 lineups. And so these guys know what they're doing, and they make 100 $1 lineups, and then all of a sudden when you make 10 contests at $1, you're playing the same guy 10 times, and he's like a pro, and he kills you in all 10. So if you select the 1, so you only one opponent per, it'll only let you let one person play you, if that makes sense. So for each of those 10 games, it has to be a different person that'll play you. So that'll limit the chances of you getting just demolished by the same dude who just entered 100 lineups at $1. If that makes sense. Was that convoluted, or did everybody track that?
Yeah, I understood it. So if you get good at this and Fantasy Hacker works, you should be making 100 lineups.
Yeah. And that's kind of another thing. I mean, you can go put all your eggs in one basket and make a $100 lineup and go against a random person. But like Scott said at the beginning of this, like the guys that are entering the $100 at a time, I mean, they're playing thousands of dollars a night. In fantasy, they're doing this for a living almost. So they're tracking it all day. They're probably going to have every advantage, every edge. But if you can enter 100 $1 lineups, then you're going to get a bunch of the guys that are just messing around, that somebody at work just showed them DraftKings and they said, I'll try it for $1. And they put in a lineup without looking at any optimizers, without looking at any stats or data. You got a better chance of coming out on top.
Yeah, and to be clear, I said that. Scott's not taking my big salad.
Sorry.
That was me. Thank you.
You can have your big salad.
Thank you, Scott. And I can see you were gonna let it fly and try to take that credit.
Listen, I'm the one that just won first place out of 475 people. So
you think you can take my big salad because that you have a little pride in a system that we have built together, but basically Adams has built.
We're all equal partners here.
See, you're taking his big salad now.
I don't even like salads, so you guys can. All right, 5th tip. Use optimizers as a tool. So we believe we're putting together the best, most affordable, simplest optimizer on the market with Fantasy Hacker. And it has all the data laid out in front of you. It breaks everything down by points per minute rather than by game. So you can see if there's a a variability in the minutes a player's going to be playing. It's going to adjust the stats accordingly. We're adjusting for pace. We're adjusting for opponent. We're trying to get as many variables and as many factors in to our algorithm as we can possibly get, and then make it simple to use. Make it one affordable monthly price to see all the data. Optimize your lineups every night. But with that being said, there's others out there. Use all of them as a tool. So what I wouldn't suggest, even for fantasy hackers, don't go on and click optimize and then just enter that lineup. Go on, click optimize, and use it as a tool. See what the optimizer is showing you. Sort the columns by fantasy value. That's where you're going to find a lot of the players that you can fill out the bottom of your lineups. But kind of like we mentioned before, use your instincts. Use the data that you have in front of you, and use what you've seen watching games. If somebody's coming off a loss and you think this guy's going to have a big bounce back game, for example, Harden last night, I think he had like a 5-point game, a 15-point game, and he was been really quiet for 3 games. Then he played the worst defense in the NBA against the Jazz and just popped off on them. Had 34 points in the first half, 20 points in the first quarter. So
basically, anyone playing the Jazz, you want on your roster if you know what's what.
Yeah. And you can see if you're in Harden's head a little bit, and you can kind of see, look, he's had some slow games, he's had some bad games. All of a sudden, he's going to get to play the Jazz. He's going to use that as a game where he can get right, and he's going to take a ton of shots just to make sure he gets right. So that kind of stuff is not going to show up on any optimizer. But if you can kind of see that, you can slate in Harden as your stud, and then you can fill out the rest of your lineups with scrubs using optimizers like Fantasy Hacker, sorting by value, and seeing who has the highest value at the lowest salary numbers, and fill in the rest of your roster with those guys. You're going to be really, really successful in fantasy basketball. So those are my 5 tips. Hopefully Josie knows a little bit more about what we're doing now.
It's give or take. It's. I guess my question, and shame on me, really shame on Nils, but what MVP for tonight? What specific site are you using to bet?
Oh, DraftKings.
You're doing DraftKings.
I think everyone's doing DraftKings.
What's the other one?
FanDuel.
And why? Why one over the other?
DraftKings has more users right now.
For me, it's because I own some DraftKings stock, and so when I lose my money to them, I feel like I'm gaining some of it back.
Kind of hedging.
How much stock do you own?
I'm hedging my bets here. It's not enough to actually do anything.
Well, I think what everyone wants to know, Nils, is were you able to get the taxes filed the following Monday?
I was able to file them. They actually extended because of the Friday and the end of the year there, or the month. So, yeah, they accepted my taxes on Monday. It was just fine.
Can I end on a hot take here for y'all?
Please.
We haven't started, so we'd love to see you end.
So we know I don't like troublemakers in the NBA. I don't like Draymond. I don't like Marcus. We know the list. One person who I do enjoy, because I think he does it for the right reasons, is Dylan Brooks. Big fan of Dylan Brooks. I appreciate him. He's feisty. He's energetic. He's a team guy. Whereas like Draymond's obnoxious. He's not. I mean, I think he had the game of his life, like either last night or 2 nights ago. Had like 20-something points and 8 boards, 7 assists. Like he'll never have a game like that ever again the rest of his career. But Dylan's just doing what he can to keep his team afloat. And I appreciate Dylan. I like what he does. I appreciate what he does, and he's not afraid of anyone. So there's my hot take.
You're a big fan of a guy that gets kicked out of his former team.
Are you talking about Memphis, right?
Yeah. They didn't want him.
They weren't a big fan.
But maybe they just didn't catch the vision. Maybe
exactly. And look where Memphis is now.
Yeah, look where New York is now. I mean,
what did New York do?
New York's done nothing.
Well, why are we talking about New York?
Yeah, we're New York.
Is?
What?
No, dear.
No, my goodness. Houston. Like
Oh,
number
he's-
2 seed.
Oh,
Led by
shoot.
Dylan.
Dylan the villain.
Tells you I don't even know where he's at. I don't
You
care
got
about
Nils. Nils is talking New York. He's going into Mountain America. He's paying taxes on Black Friday. Like, Nils has got to wake up.
But that's normal for me. Like when Adams is doing it, I was concerned. When I'm doing it, I'm like, oh, okay, this is another day. That's totally normal. I swear that I thought he was in New York. That tells you how much I know.
We should edit that one out. We're going to lose some credibility from our viewers.
Certainly.
We'll crank that out.
Well, between that one and between Joe not knowing how to bet.
See, but I'm here for the everyday man. Like, I represent the people who just don't dare to ask those questions or speak up and say they don't know. Like, I'm doing it for them.
Reasonable. And I'm doing it for the guys that don't even know which players are on which team, which also definitely should have Fantasy Hacker to help them.
How are they going to know where to find, like, if they're going to New York to find Dylan Brooks to bet on, like, they're not going to find him.
Also, it's wonderful. You don't have to. It's all online. You pull up Fantasy Hacker. It tells you what team the players play for. Simple.
I got to admit, I owe Fantasy Hackers on this one tonight. AJ Green, I don't even know who that guy is. I got him.
I thought you were talking about AJ Brown for a minute. So
yeah, or AJ. What was his name? Was it AJ Brown? AJ Green? AJ Green.
Not to be mistaken for AC Green.
Speaking of AJs, real quick before we end, any reaction to AJ going to BYU?
Oh, Debonsa.
Debonsa.
I think it's going to be great.
Like $7.5 million. He's making more than almost all the rookies.
I sat by him at the Jazz game this week. He was sitting in Ryan Smith's seats, 2 in front of me. I have nothing to report other than that. He was quiet the whole game.
Was he shown on the Jumbotron at all?
No, but the NBA, all the Jazz players came up like one by one and like introduced themselves to him. So,
oh really?
Yeah, kind of interesting.
I'm excited about this. AJ Debonsa.
I'm excited.
Well,
that'd be great.
Currently plays with Thurl Bailey's nephew.
Oh,
not
Mason
former
Southwick.
BMW star, but
Mason's cousin, Southwick, he's committed to UVU, but he plays on the Utah Prep Academy team.
Southwick's committed to UVU?
Yeah, and Richfield's very upset about it because he's obviously a Richfield kid, but he plays on Utah Prep Academy with Bonsa, and so, we don't get him on our team.
Well, he's also 35, so.
No, not Southwick. Southwick's cousin.
He did reiterate Southwick, and you confirmed.
I said Southwick's cousin. If watch it back.
We'll edit this out as well.
Hey, also, I'll end on a high note. In the last 12 days, I've had Arby's 7 times. I've had a lot of Arby's.
Thanks for listening to the Fantasy Hackers podcast. Don't forget to subscribe to Fantasy Hackers on YouTube and follow us on X for real-time fantasy basketball updates.